Find true love with the Geek Legion of Doom.
George Henry Horton directs, writes, produces and stars Strawstalker. Now, if you followed my channel for a while, you may know that I'm actually quite a big fan of scarecrows as a kind of horror antagonist. And this is a new Scarecrow movie. It is an ultra low budget Scarecrow movie, but a Scarecrow movie nonetheless. So, what's the story? It primarily follows two influencers who are kind of like, I guess, vacationing. They're doing something. They've rented a house in California, and you know, they're kind of vlogging and doing their influencer stuff, I guess. And in this house, there is this. They find that kind of like almost like a scarecrow, or like some sort of effigy of a kind of scary looking, you know, creature guy, I guess. And you know, they're a little bit perturbed by it, but they just think, oh well, it must be like a prank, or it's some other influencer that has been there before, something like this. But it appears to be moving about slightly, and on top of that, the kind of the neighbourhood seems a little strange. And as the movie goes on, there seems to be some type of dark influence which is being suggestive to people. And then this scarecrow may not just be a mannequin or anything like that. It might be a kind of some type of deity, some type of creature. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. So, a very low budget movie. Why do I say that? It primarily is filmed in a house and their backyard. That's the majority of the locations here. So it clearly is an extremely low budget movie. But, that being said, what does George Henry Horton do to kind of negate that clear low budget? I mean, for a start, this is a kind of a found footage movie. And I think the idea here of this couple who are vloggers staying in this rental house, again, it kind of gives a story reason for these guys to be there. And as such, the story doesn't necessarily require huge amounts of location shooting and things like this. The actual scarecrow itself, I would say arguably you could say it's a little over-designed with this kind of skeletal face. I mean, a genuine scarecrow, would it have a skeletal face? It actually kind of looks like Skeletor, I have to say, to a degree. But at the same time, I kind of dug it because it reminded me of like The Blind Dead. This kind of like shrouded, hooded kind of skeletal figure. It looks quite creepy. It looks a little bit like the Grim Reaper, like lurking about, and you know, it looks kind of intimidating, kind of scary. And like I say, it almost looks like the Blind Dead have emptied their tombs and are kind of now wandering around modern California. Scary prospect. So I kind of quite like that in a way, and I also quite like, I won't spoil anything for you about the world building mythology here that surrounds this kind of particular area and what might be going on, because it kind of points to somewhat of a larger world in a way, and kind of what's going on. I think there's some interesting stuff to be said there. I also think, I mean, this is not something the movie really dwells on. It doesn't give you all the answers, but there seems to be some type of influence being exerted here. And again, the movie doesn't really explain it, but you can kind of pick up on some of the kind of the elements there, and it's a thing. Okay, again, some interesting stuff that is kind of put onto film. I think the movie has kind of an interesting framing device as well. The movie primarily follows our two vloggers, but there's also another vlogger who at one point has an interaction with this couple who is kind of, I guess, telling the story to other people and therefore uploading this kind of footage. And it seems, in a way, it kind of seems pointless. I wonder if this was a reshoots to kind of expand the runtime. But in a way, it's kind of interesting in its own right, because he's kind of one of these kind of like manosphere type, you know, telling people how to kind of like chat women up and also make money. It's clearly like an Andrew Tate sort of style character. And it's not really trying to, I think, make all that much commentary and anything like that, but it's just like an interesting sort of choice to have that, whilst there are other two vloggers this one guy doesn't like, because he thinks they're the typical sort of vloggers who don't really do anything. So there's a little bit of sort of, it touches on a kind of a little bit of views, I suppose, through different sort of circles in regards to, you know, influencer bubbles and things like that, which I found, you know, quite interesting. And this kind of manosphere guy, like, you know, he's giving it all about how, you know, how he makes all this money and all the rest of it, and then how he's like to chat women up. And then we learn that he's actually driving like an Uber, and that's his actual job and things like that. So there's a little bit of kind of stuff going on that it does kind of subtly, which it doesn't really linger on at any point, but nonetheless, you know, there's some sort of elements here that you can kind of like, okay, you know. So there's that. Okay, so what doesn't work? Now, again, the main problem for me here, it's such a limited movie in scope. It is literally, I mean, it has an excuse, but it's really a movie that takes place in someone's backyard and in their house. So it really feels like a low-budget movie. It really does. And it's not even that big of a house, to be honest. So, you know, it's like a kind of like somewhat middle-class Californian property with a small swimming pool and things like this. It's nothing too grandiose. So it really does feel very, very small in scale, to be honest. And even when we have this kind of, this kind of situation where we learn the neighbourhood and how they're involved, again, it all feels pretty small scale. And they try to negate it by having this a found footage movie, which kind of tends to err on the side of smaller projects. But nonetheless, it feels small, it feels low budget. Because of the aesthetic of found footage, again, when we have our Scarecrow character just kind of wandering around, it's not really filmed in a particularly kind of dramatic way, and therefore it kind of just feels like a guy in like a Halloween costume sometimes. There's a couple of occasions where they've, you know, like I said, it kind of looks a little bit more eerie, and the costume itself is, as I say, it is creepy, but at the same time it looks it looks like it's designed to be scary. And I think sometimes when you have, if it's meant to be like this kind of effigy, this kind of scarecrow, this totem, whatever it's meant to be, you know, it has this kind of skull face, which almost looks like it's sort of trying too hard to look scary from the get-go. Whilst had it been something a little more mundane, like, you know, the typical burlap sack type of scarecrow, something like that, it might have seen, you know, a more mundane thing that is coming to life, and therefore be a bit more disturbing in a way, because you wouldn't necessarily expect it. Here it kind of looks like it's meant to be scary, and it is, I guess, but at the same time, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. We spend a lot of time with our couple, and now they are designed to be influencer-like, you know, but we're spending the first 2/3 of this movie really just following these guys as they prounce around and do influencer stuff. And, you know, if you're not a fan of that, it's not going to win you over to any, like, I do fancy watching some influencers now, and, you know, lifestyle gurus and all the rest of it. And it's because they do seem vapid and annoying. And they are kind of designed to be that way, but they still are. And, you know, we spend a lot of time with it. And I think the movie could have had a little bit more of exploring the neighbourhood, having these guys meeting some more of the neighbours and stuff like that, and give you a more of a sense of what's kind of going on, about, you know, who these kind of their neighbours are and what the setup is, and what they're going to give you some earlier clues about maybe the kind of the bigger picture and stuff like that. But we just spend a lot of them time with these two, like talking to the camera and talking about parties and all the rest of it. And it really isn't that interesting. I know you've got to have a little bit of character development and stuff like that and get an idea of who these people are. But I think there could have been more interesting things done with that, to be honest with you. And the bulk of this is the bulk of the movie. Now, the last act of the movie is where the kind of the action happens. And, you know, that's a mixed bag on its own, but at least it's kind of a little bit more exciting. And but the first two acts, it's, you know, when they find this Scarecrow, it's just like it looks like a mannequin, you know, with a mask on and stuff like that. It's not all that, but people, you think, somewhat overreacting. I mean, we know it's going to come alive at some point, but, you know, it's a little silly. So yeah, it's. I don't think these characters are necessarily going to be characters your audiences will ingratiate particularly with. And again, they are somewhat designed to be like that. I understand that, but nonetheless, you know, they are who they are, and it's like, maybe if you're a fan of this stuff like this, you may like it. So it's a movie which I think, if you are a fan of low budget movies, you can kind of, you can put up with maybe a little bit of an overlong introduction, really. The latter act of the movie is more interesting. It has more traditional horror elements and has the more interesting stuff happening in it. But it takes a while to get there, and even when we do, I think it's hamstrung by a very, very low budget and a real lack of kind of like opportunity to kind of expand. I think which it could have done. Ultimately, it becomes a below average movie for me. But you know, there's some elements here that I thought I kind of liked here and there. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Come party with the Geek Legion.
Hit subscribe!